When you have someone like Will, who's on, really another level, and there are plenty of folks that are on. I'm not trying to say that he's the one and only. I mean, there's Jay-Z, Serena Williams, that I mentioned before, and plenty of others. The, one thing that we've actually found is that even being able to mention his name in a press release can oftentimes turbocharge distribution, especially for harder to reach demographics.
Let me start with a little story because, of course, we're going to talk about the role of celebrity VCs today. But I think 2017, during the election, Trump versus Clinton, I was in the US and of course, now I'm in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, but I was in the US and I was visiting the whole, like, might Trump win the election topic really cooked up in the late night shows. And like every good tourist, I made it to Stephen Colbert, these kind of free tickets you get for the late night shows. And they were supposed to have John Oliver on, I believe, but then when I went, Will Smith actually was on the show. That was really my first, I think, touch point with a tier one American celebrity. I don't think I've ever quite witnessed an audience exploding that much because just the sheer presence of Will really made everyone erupt in the audience. How was it for you to work with someone like that?
It's funny because he's such a force. For a lot of folks that are my age, I'm 35, they grew up watching Fresh Prince, and I was a
Yeah.
kid, watching that. And so it was so strange when I first met him because you feel like you've known him for 30 years. And he's like a close friend, and you've experienced, you've seen all these like the arcs and troughs during the story of that show, and just all the, amazing movies he's done since Independence Day, saving our country from these alien overlords and stuff. When I met him, you just feel this kinship or connection when in reality, he has no idea who you are. It's such a privilege to be around someone as talented as he is. Certainly, he has a whole satellite and cast of folks around him that are supporting him. And it's not even just him. I mean, his wife, his kids, they're all icons and current and future huge talents themselves. So really, really excited to see where they take their careers.
So next to working together in the VC, it sounds like you also kind of grew a bit closer as colleagues. Is that correct?
Yeah, he definitely has so much going on. And to be quite candid, he has a lot cooler and more profitable things to do than run an early stage venture fund. So in that sense, he entrusts us to manage all of the deal flow and make investments and be a good steward of capital. So I would say he does so many different things. He and Jada have their own family foundation. They support Jaden's Just Water and all of his social impact initiatives. So we're very much leveraging his name, image, and likeness and brand in purpose of advancing his mission, which is to use his technology, influence, and whenever it comes to it, capital to improve lives.
Yeah. But of course, for the business model of Dreamers VC, Keisuke Honda is also kind of the other part of it. I must be honest, I had to research him first because I wasn't so familiar with him. But I think you described him as a David Beckham of Japan to me in our pre-conversation. Hope I can say that. How is your relationship with Keisuke? Were you as starstruck as with?
Yeah, I would say he's a little more, for one, not that we're ever trying to compare them, but he's on the same, sort of tier as well, just given he hasn't been in the limelight for that long. He's far younger. But Keisuke is certainly a force in his own right. I think he's one of the top Asian World Cup scorers, certainly for Japan. And just given, I don't think they have, as many athletes on the global stage, he obviously occupies an extremely high level and is this beloved star in Japan. And so when we were walking around in Japan with him, or even just in the US, all of a sudden you'll see walking down the Market Street in San Francisco, and all of a sudden you'll see some Japanese tourists just lose it on the street. But I had never really been around any of these influencers or talent or celebrities, whether global or local. It's always just as humbling and starstruck as it always is.
Yeah, yeah. But you did work for the Clinton Foundation before, right? So tell me a bit about your background, how you actually got into those circles. Did you meet Will at a party and then suddenly you hit it off, or what happened there?
Yeah, so I started my career in international development. So graduated from college, was a wayward soul, I would say. I read Muhammad Yunus's Banker to the Poor. And after that, I was like, you know what, maybe social impact and international development is the next step in my career. And so spent about 5 years in international development, a year and a half in East Africa, 3.5 years in Haiti, where I spent some time with President Clinton's foundation. So it wasn't until I went to business school where I was just exposed to the full breadth of different parts of finance. And from there, I transitioned into early stage venture, joined a corporate venture fund, and then Dreamers. And the way I got introduced to Dreamers is I have a very close friend from high school. And when I was at his wedding in like 2015, I met the gentleman who would end up being the head of Will's family office. And so when I was in early stage venture at the corporate fund, I would always reconnect with my buddy. He was like, hey, Will's family office is spinning out or trying to launch a fund that is not going to be any of Will's capital. We're actually going to be getting all of Japanese capital, and he's going to be doing it in coordination with Keisuke. And so I was initially very skeptical of these like celebrity led influencer funds, but when he said that it was going to be structured like 2 and 20, everyone was going to be properly incentivized and we're going to run this like a real fund, that's when my ears really perked up. And so, yeah, I was super excited to come and help launch it.
Yeah. And what motivated you to go into VCs in particular? So why did you choose another path in the finance world?
Yeah. And I wish I had a better answer to this, but at the time, I wrote my essays about going into impact investing. And
Yeah.
I sort of thought, at the end of the day, I hadn't ever taken a serious business or econ class before business school. So, I was like, look, if in 5 to 10 years I want to end up in impact investing, what's sort of the best way to get there? And what are the best roles that are currently out there now?
Yeah.
What are the prereqs to get in? And so fundamentally, when you look at like the spectrum of finance or even just in private equity, it's a lot easier to really, sort of scale your impact if you're starting at venture at the early stage than you are if you're going at PE, where revenues are mature and stable and growth is, certainly nothing like up into the right, like in venture. So from a pure financial perspective, I think it made sense to go earlier. And then from a pure excitement perspective, I mean, all the innovation that's coming out of decarbonization, direct air capture, and all the novel things in crypto maybe that are, sort of taking over remittances, et cetera. That's all happening. All that innovation is happening at the early stage. So yeah, I was very fortunate. I mean, it was just pure serendipity that I ended up in venture. I never focused on it during school. And so here we are.
Yeah. And now you've been privy to some of the hottest deals in Silicon Valley, some could say.
Yeah, I will say that was one of the most, I guess, like shocking things to me is because when I was at my corporate venture fund, we were backed by a legacy Fortune 250 insurance carrier. And, it was a great team. It was a great setup. And we had, a good amount of capital, $200 million at the time. But we really had to sell our money. I mean, you had to go and, make the case to a founder why they should have you and the corporation on the cap table. Corporate venture capital tends to have a pretty negative stigma. And so you really had to fight and prove your value prop and all these things. And then I come over to Dreamers, and here it's the deal flow is 100% inbound, and we're LPs in Andreessen's Cultural Leadership Fund. So over 20% of our portfolio has been directly invested with them. The visibility we get, and we've done about 80 deals in the last 3 years since we launched. So yeah, it's been really exciting. Super just privileged to be, in this position, being in the same room as a lot of folks that I would have dreamed to be 3 or 4 years ago. I wake up every day still smiling.
Yeah. Yeah. How does your deal flow work? Do they just send over the hottest deals? Do they send over every deals, or how does your deal flow really work? Also in collaboration with your partners.
Sure. So our LP relationship with the Cultural Leadership Fund, so that actually happened right before Dreamers launched, and Will's family office invested as one of the first LPs. The genesis behind the Cultural Leadership Fund was if America's number one, unquantified export is its culture, and one of the biggest determinants or drivers of its culture is African American, lifestyle, streetwear, music, et cetera. I mean, athletes, the whole aura around this, then why don't they play more of a role in tech, which is clearly reshaping our society, dominates market caps, et cetera. And this is run by a gentleman named Chris Lyons, who was just named general partner there, who's an absolutely, he's another force. He's just getting started in his career. And so, their whole point was they were kind of an internal fund where they would co-invest with other deals that all the other entries GPs are doing. And then when they get those allocations, which was, never really a problem, then they would syndicate it to their LPs, and we would go direct onto the cap table of the underlying portcos, not through the fund. And so from there, a lot of times the founder will be like, "Look, like we actually, it makes sense. We're going after a certain demographic, or yes, this mission makes sense. So yeah, we'll give you some allocation." And then that's when we'd sort of get the call. They're like, "Hey, do you want to talk to this company, this company, this company?" So that's sort of how our relationship with Andreessen worked. We've certainly gotten to know a lot of the other GPs on, various different teams. And then even just from there, it's kind of like a snowball effect. All the other funds would sort of get to know like, oh, you can co-invest with Will Smith, and, Jay-Z has a fund or two, and, Serena Williams and all these things. And they're really institutionalizing their operations. And so basically name got out and we started to build our brand. And today we're 80 deals deep.
Wow. 80 deals, and just how long have you been in? Have you been there now?
3 years. Yeah. 3 years since we
Wow.
launched. So yeah,
Wow.
pretty breakneck pace.
That's a pretty stressful deal flow, I would say. That's awesome. And so let's dive into the role of celebrity VCs in particular, because the general math is of course always that on the one side it's kind of a nice way to get some extra marketing in, but of course also with the Cultural Foundation and Dreamers VC is particularly a focus on African American demographics. How does that pan out? So is there a certain part in a deal that is allocated to marketing resources, or is Will then responsible to become the face of the brand? Or how can I imagine that in practice actually?
Yeah. So first and foremost, we make no, promises that he's necessarily going to do something or any member of his family. And I'll say, two things. So, first to start off, sort of the allure behind celebrity or influencers, coming onto a company's cap table is that, of course, it helps with branding. And then really, I think the core of it is that if they post about something and the customer ends up converting, it brings that marginal cost of acquiring a customer to zero. And this is in a world where Google and Facebook end up, there's some like, sort of unproven statistic that like 20 or 30% of all venture dollars eventually trickle their way down to Google or Facebook simply through ads, because so many
Yeah.
companies, in particular D2C companies, are trying to acquire customers, these crazy acquisition costs. So
Yeah.
of course, adding an influencer who's especially genuinely excited about the product makes total sense. One thing that I think people don't entirely realize, and especially this may be, kind of special for someone like Will, but yeah, if you want him to do like even a 30-second or like 1 minute long Instagram spot, there are sort of two aspects that come into play when it comes into like, because of course this has to be done on sort of like a high resolution. This is a Hollywood production. He's not going to do some, sort of like low budget thing. There's the talent fee and there's the production fee. And so the production fee, even for doing something that will get whittled down into a minute, will still, could easily end up being 150 or $200,000 over a
Wow.
day or a couple days, whatever it takes. Because again, this is, these are like high quality folks surrounding editors, all the folks do, do the creatives, and so on and so forth. And then there's the talent fee. And that's the fee that will command simply for, having been in the limelight for 30 years and, of course, doing all sorts of endorsements. And so that can be, incredibly high. And that's something that, is possible to sort of negotiate down and, maybe even waive in very special cases. But the production fee is something that has to get paid because these are, normal folks. They're not influencers who can sort of take a hit, take a zero on just doing something for a product they like. And for a lot of times, it doesn't really make sense for the startups to pay that amount simply for just a 30-second spot. So I think,
Yeah.
if I were a founder thinking about taking on an influencer or celebrity, I mean, one is like understanding what they're going to bring to the brand or to the company or to the product. And then second is like, if we do want to escalate this into sort of like a commercial relationship, what do those costs kind of look like? Because at the end of the day, there comes a point where if you have someone that's really on another level, like a tier one celebrity, and they start to do things for your product, that's where you kind of have to get the business manager involved because it's like, look, like this is borderline like a full on endorsement, and he can command millions of dollars if this was Procter and Gamble or
Yeah.
Unilever, Kraft, whatever. I know we're on your cap table, but like oftentimes the value that we're delivering on a market value basis is much higher than the allocation that we invested.
Yeah. Isn't it difficult to really screen for a founder? I mean, Andreessen is a pretty good catch. You say, okay, we bring Will on the board, let's go. But for the founder, it sounds like that might be a bit difficult to really, screen the impact of that, right? And to understand the impact of that before. Yeah, these celebrity VCs, right? Like, what is the impact they could really make? So, what do you say to these people when they criticize that is just this kind of the new shiny horse in town that kind of blindsides founders with those big celebrity names?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, this is valid criticism. I guess the first thing is both sides should be sort of understanding expectations. That way they're able to manage that going forward. I think when you have someone like Will, who's on, really another level, and there are plenty of folks that are on, I'm not trying to say that he's the one and only. I mean, there's Jay-Z, Serena Williams, that I mentioned before, and,
Yeah.
and plenty of others. One thing that we've actually found is that even being able to mention his name in a press release can oftentimes turbocharge distribution, especially for harder to reach demographics. And so by that, I mean, for some of our portfolio companies, they'll mention him and Nas and, whomever else is invested. And because of that, we'll end up seeing some African-American focused media pick those stories up. Then that gets picked up and it turns into this flywheel. And all of a sudden you have 250,000 shares on LinkedIn and all these various different platforms, Facebook, et cetera. And then really that's hitting that demographic that the startup was initially that had no idea that they actually could reach, as opposed to the sort of monolithic TechCrunch, or VentureBeat group. And then last thing I'll say is that, we're minority investors. We're not leading deals. We are extremely low maintenance. We took the Tiger Global approach before anyone knew what it was. I mean, in that we were totally hands off. The other thing that I think people should realize is that, if you think about the value add to check size ratio, we're not asking for like 20% of a company's, for ownership or, their cap table. We're taking, pretty small, couple $100,000 slugs. And for that, we think that we actually punch above our weight when it comes there. So I totally understand all the stigma and criticisms around celebrity VCs, but we're very upfront about what we think we can accomplish with the founder. We never over promise and under deliver. We make very clear, like, this is what we think we can give you for this check size, and and we hope it'll be multiples of that in terms of value delivered.
Yeah. Can you tell me a story of one deal where this panned out perfectly? So maybe there are a couple of stories that already, yeah, you can see where this actually really worked out.
Yeah, yeah. I think we have a couple examples, but the one that's most notable, and I don't want to repeat the story, but it's with a company called Step, which is banking for teens, and it's started by a gentleman named CJ McDonald, who had previously sold a fintech company to First Data with his co-founder at the time was Vinny Lingam, the founder of Civic and kind of like a crypto influencer. So CJ, we met him, I think at some whenever it was in like 2018 or something. And he was like, hey, I'm going to do this fintech idea. One of the most overlooked, parts of this whole of a customer is before they're 18 in the eyes of a bank, because they're not making any money. They still need parental permission to even just get their own account. Yet the second they turn 18 or 19 and they go off to college, they're getting student loans. They need a checking account. And so there's like this huge, I guess, like sort of like precipice in between, or cliff rather, from the time they go from being like totally worthless to a bank to incredibly valuable. And he's like, what if we sort of start even earlier when they have their newspaper delivery or babysitting jobs when they're 13 or 14, teach them financial literacy, teach them about how to take care of money. And yes, like the deposits, it's not going to be huge or anything, but we just want to sort of get them as a customer. And then when they turn 18, either we end up becoming a bank ourselves and we can service them, or we can send them to all of our partner banks. And those leads are, banks pay an incredible amount because the lifetime value of, the bank customer is so high that like they're willing to pay a ton. So anyway, the story completely added up. He was one of the first, like Amex had tried this. Anyway, so CJ, comes to us and we're in, one of his first financings. And I remember like, when we first invested, it got picked up. It was like, oh, you can always mention Will Smith in the press release. And so he did. And, a few months after that, and he's just an unbelievable human, an unbelievable fintech founder. And he was like, you know what? You'll never believe this. Like, we ended up getting so much traction off of this. And when I mentioned that, like 250,000 shares or something, I'm pretty sure it was for Step. And, he was just totally astounded. And I think his marketing person and the folks that were sort of tracking all the metrics were like not only overjoyed, but no one had seen this. And so that's where we were like, oh, wow, like we can really make that case. And so we did that, especially for a company called Landis. And this was a Sequoia backed sort of lease to own home buying platform that we did, that Jay-Z was on as well. And I can't even tell you, I respond to every cold email that we get at Dreamers, because I think it's the least we could do for any aspiring founder or whomever. I'd say we, ever since we got that, and the whole point of Landis is to, it's only for first time home buyers, and they identify a house that they want. And then Landis will actually buy the house. And generally, if they can't get the mortgage themselves, Landis will work with them for a year, coach them, get their credit score up to a point. And then after a year, they can either get a mortgage and buy the house from Landis, and those lease payments will cover some of the equity, or they don't even have to. It's a no strings attached like if they don't want the house anymore, that's fine. Landis will then move it off the books on the other side. And, I probably fielded like 600 emails in the coming weeks, just straight in coming to Dreamers. And I would just send them all to Landis. And so I know that had a material impact, and even just raising awareness within the African American and first time home buyer community. So yeah, those are some of our proud examples. And of course, there's an argument that like, yes, we could always be doing more, but again, like we're very small components, basis points of ownership on the cap table. So yeah, we're very happy
Yeah.
with outcomes like that.
Yeah, I find that PR aspect is crucially underlooked in startup world. I mean, of course, the ones you mentioned, the TechCrunch, the Verge articles, and PR communications are often very successful, or like the standard go-to. I think every founder that I talk to wants to be featured in TechCrunch, and then they don't really, yeah, see what the impact is. But with Fintalent, we've seen something similar. Like we also try to connect really early to people that are quite, yeah, connected in the scene. And of course, they're not on a Will Smith scale of any kind, but just these little connections that might not even cost a lot. That really is makes a big impact to just get the wheel kind of turning. And I think that's also really hard to put a stamp on how much that is worth, because that initial motion in startup is so crucial, especially like when that comes from, yeah, like a value adding investor in that sense. Of course, that's really awesome. But that actually is a really good bridge to my next question, because I also understand you're very interested in international development in the next generation in a way, and you're also an instructor at Wall Street Oasis. Let's dive a bit into that. What is your role, and what kind of topics do you instruct in?
Yeah. So this probably happened last summer, the summer of 2020. We were in this COVID summer, and I was approached by Patrick, who's the CEO and founder of Wall Street Oasis. And he was saying, hey, and for the audience, Wall Street Oasis is probably one of the largest finance forums dedicated towards more younger candidates, whether that's college students, recent graduates for transitioning or getting their first career in finance, particularly in investment banking, PE, hedge funds, some of the more hard finance roles. And what he started to realize, and I think what's been obviously pretty obvious, is that not as many college grads want to go into Wall Street anymore. They sort of see like they can make maybe a similar amount of money going into tech, and you're obviously doing a lot more innovation and all the rest. And what comes with that is like instead of folks coming after they do their 2 years as a banking analyst or 2 years as a McKinsey, Bain, BCG consultant, they don't want to go into necessarily PE and work 100 hours. Maybe they can go into venture and work 70 and again, be at the forefront of the bleeding edge of a lot of exciting technologies. And so he was saying, look, we've done a ton of financial modeling courses, valuation, DCF, like blah, 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 but we've never done one on venture. And like, we know there's a ton of late demand. So would you be interested in setting up this course? And I was like, and I knew it would be a huge undertaking because I'd have to, put all the content. I don't have an analyst, like a personal analyst to go, run all the stuff down, but I knew the endeavor would be incredibly beneficial for my own understanding. It would give me a textbook foundation of the asset class and all the modeling that went with it. So yeah, so over the course of a couple weeks, actually several months, I would say, I built out all of the content in the form of PowerPoint, a number of different Excel modeling exercises from how carried interest sort of works all the way to, every clause and provision in a term sheet. What can you model difference between broad-based, narrow-based, full ratchet, and an anti-dilution provision, due diligence, how to, do an ARR build, et cetera. And then finally did recorded voiceovers and their videos, walking students through each of it. But finished at the end of last year. I think reception's been pretty good. I get approached by former students all the time, which is incredibly, satisfying.
Yeah, so how's that feedback going? So you just mentioned you get approached by former students, but how was the response in the market?
It's good. I don't have like total visibility onto like how many people are taking it, but I think I mean from his feedback has been positive to me. I should say that there are a good amount of other venture capital training courses and all these things. Some that are offered by big institutions. Wharton has one where you can
Yeah.
come learn venture in 3 days for like $20,000 or something. There are plenty of others online on like Coursera, Udemy, but this one is, I think, one of certainly is the most comprehensive for the price. So some will just do term sheets, some will just do whatever certain aspects, just due diligence. But this one kind of walks anyone. So like if they start from zero, don't know anything about venture and finish, they should be able to slot into at least an analyst or associate role, having known nothing about venture before.
Yeah, I find the job that Patrick and the folks at Wall Street Aces did with building this community is awesome. I think it's such an active and yeah, supportive community of talent driven folks. It's really quite amazing to see and really good role model, I think, for the finance industry. How does that influence your view on the future of the finance industry in general? I mean, you must see a lot of young talent. I mean, you just mentioned already that Wall Street is not the traditional path anymore. But what is it that you see in younger folks? Like, what fundamentally changed for these professionals?
I guess there are two things. One is I think we're all in this race for human capital. So, universities, they want to find the best students, employers want to find the best employees, founders want to find the best employees to build their companies, VCs want to find the best founders, et cetera. And, right now, I think we're also now seeing, folks don't want 10 years ago, you could realistically graduate from a school, from a great school and go to Facebook and think you're changing the world. Literally no one is probably graduating and being like, okay, I want to go join Meta because I'm going to have a positive impact on the world. And I'm not trying to throw shade at them. I'm just saying this is the field in the market. And obviously you have to, be an ostrich with your head in the sand to not see all the, the upcoming antitrust cases, whatever. Of course, everyone looks at like Gen Z and they're like, oh, these kids are just interested in TikTok. But it's like, no, there are far more interesting undercurrents that are happening. And they're really taking place in like crypto, in Discord and Twitter behind the scenes. And then of course, just, being sustainability focused and climate tech. And so that's why you sort of have all these like, huge shifts in cultural trends that we're sort of witnessing and, maybe even aging ourselves out of. It's like a lot of people, even my age, and certainly everyone older, they literally cannot comprehend how virtual real estate exists. They're like, how can somebody pay, millions of real dollars for virtual real estate? There's no mortgage, there's no deed or anything. I mean, you take an NFT and you talk to someone older than me, and they're like, yeah, like I can just do that on YouTube or whatever. And so we're really changing around all these ideas of like ownership and scarcity. And ultimately, I think that's where, the future is sort of headed. And then, that also kind of builds on top of where developers are going. So at the end of the day, if, as Mark Andreessen says, if software is eating the world, where are the next, few years? What are the sort of the software developments that's going to be happening? Where are the developers going? And again, they're sort of eschewing big tech now. Big tech is now what Wall Street was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And so now they're going into those crypto or like doing things for the climate, for the planet, much more impact focused. So that's sort of what we're seeing. And from the capital perspective, we're in this almost like a paradigm shift, I would say. So deals have never been more. This year, the year of 2021, will have more. It's like grown. I don't want to say exponentially, but incredibly in terms of the amount of venture capital that's poured into every sector and just in aggregate. And there are going to be, I believe, more money will come from mutual funds, hedge funds, non-traditional investors, family offices, et cetera, than traditional venture funds. And this is one of the first times that's ever happened. And the reason is that, we're in this, low interest rate environment. Everyone's looking for yield. Inflation is going up. So really holding on to cash is like negative savings. And that you combine that with the fact that the world is awash in capital. And this is, of course, macroeconomically with, you know, trillions and trillions of dollars entering, economies all over. You combine that with the fact that now VCs and investors are underwriting companies to huge outcomes. 5 years ago, if you had a portfolio company that became a unicorn or $1 billion valuation, that would be an incredible outcome. You're like, okay, that's probably going to 50x our investment from, whatever it was, $20 million valuation when we got in. Now we have, companies like Robinhood and Coinbase that are IPOing at $40 billion, $50 billion, et cetera. And so now it's like we can underwrite these outcomes to 50 times a $1 billion, a unicorn. And so that means we can basically like really like fast and loose with valuations when we drop term sheets. And that's why you just see money's everywhere. The multiples are totally disconnected from reality. And as a result, founders are taking money off the table at the Series A and all these, sort of crazy extra downstream effects. Venture is basically becoming commoditized. I think we're seeing that there are going to be more and more funds trying to allocate, and I think returns are looking so good that it's going to make sense for, more institutions to allocate towards venture as an asset class. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Does it make you nervous sometimes?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I'm obviously not some 30-year veteran of the Valley and I mean, really even in finance, but I graduated during the 2007, 2008 global financial crisis. Yeah, I kind of think of it as having two competing thoughts in my head. And the first is that would I be surprised and by waking up tomorrow morning and crypto prices have dropped by 50%, we're entering, maybe and maybe even just macroeconomically like with the stock markets, the capital markets, we enter a bear market, all these things. Would I be surprised? Not at all. The other thing that I'll say, the other thought that I have is that yes, we've been on this longest bull run, in recent history or really history in the last 13 years. But also, if you think about all of the innovation that's happening, and especially technologically, how little of a role that plays compared to the several trillion dollars of GDP and market caps globally that are still dominated by, some old, some stodgy and state industries. I mean, fossil fuels, oil and gas is still gigantic, despite the fact that we're divesting. There may actually be a ton more room to run. And that's what a lot of these, really folks at the top, Scott Cooper at Andreessen, I mean, he's saying like, we're just getting started. It's the longest bull run, to date, but like, it can still very easily go up and to the right. And so we may be entering one of the longest periods of like, global prosperity. And again, this is not, I'm not trying to make light of the fact that there's a ton of inequality and it's certainly going to make the rich even more richer than they are and all those things. But, maybe from a macro scale, we may actually just be just getting started. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting time for talented folks to move into finance and this kind of intersection of tech and finance. But if you would look back, like if you were your 15-year-old self now, looking back with all the knowledge that you have, I mean, not the same connections, but the same knowledge at least, like which area would you move into?
I would first, let me just say, I completely believe and follow in Jeff Bezos' regret minimization framework. So even though I didn't, I was nearly making a salary even up until I was like 30 years old when I was in business school, or like, when I matriculated. Um, Loved every aspect of being, in the Congo, landing there after Obama got elected, working in Haiti. I very much appreciate that I had those opportunities to do what I did. Were I to go back, I wish I would be a little more technically like literate or fluent. So I would have loved to actually know how, even just taken like C++ classes, or, probably done more computer science things in college courses. Then it's funny because, I took a lot of career risks just by going into international development. Like I didn't follow this tried and true path of banking, consulting, whatever, going to a big company, rotational leadership development program. So yeah, I think in retrospect, I would have maybe tried to do a startup that was more, was social impact focused. And so kind of something like Kiva, which did microfinance, but almost tried to go to one of those similar programs. So still accomplish like my impact, like sort of that drive, but also do it with maybe a more technical perspective. And then eventually, yeah, be a founder. That is clearly the way. Like I love this saying. And even though I'm very happy in my job, there's a saying that no one's ever going to pay you what you're worth. So that's why you start your own company. I think that, even for for the partners at Goldman Sachs and Big Law and whatever, there's a feeling of that, I'm sure, everywhere. So yeah, would be interesting.
Do you think that feeling is even more prevalent in minorities?
Oh, I'm sure. This is the crux of like why we should be supporting, especially during last year's, protests of like Black ownership. They get shut out of so many things. The history of discrimination in this country is one of the darkest spots, I think, clearly one of the darkest spots of our history. And you think about all of the downstream effects that have happened. It's still mind boggling for me to think that my parents, who are of Indian origin, who emigrated to the US 7 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And it was just like, I can't even believe you wanted to come. It was just like, holy cow, this is unbelievable. And it's not that they don't acknowledge that it was such a different world back then, but yeah, no, of course, this is prevalent in minorities. And that's why hopefully when people are talking about, why there are no Black partners at a lot of these firms or female, and really trying to repair all the gender inequity or just general inequity, especially in venture, it's like, look, like the reason that we don't fund as many there aren't as many African American or underrepresented, is the term I should be using, founders, is because we don't have underrepresented GPs who can actually see that there's a real market for some of these things. And so again, I think there has been some material change over the past, couple years, but it's never fast enough or as impactful enough as I think we all wish it would be. So we're making strides, but the strides could always be longer and, and quicker.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Vic, thank you for the work that you do and trying to represent minorities, at least to a certain extent, in the financial world. And I think that impact is just going to grow over time, seeing where your career is going to take you. And then interesting to see how your road from international relations and the foundation, the Clinton Foundation, then led you to where you are today, and helping entrepreneurs and founders in that direction. If our listeners want to reach out to you, where can they reach you?
And so my email is Vik at dreamers.vc. www.dreamers.vc is our website. And yeah, I say this at the end of all the podcast recordings that I've done, but yeah, our team certainly, like, we respond to 100% of emails that are received. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to get you a pitch or something, but we will review the materials, we will review the deck and give it the fair shot that it deserves, because that's the least we could do. We really want to disrupt this like warm introduction, because that's, been one of the large reasons why a lot of underrepresented folks haven't gotten the chance to sort of shoot their shot and get pitched, or rather pitch investors and all those things. So, and then we'll look to help wherever we can. Again, we are a very limited team and there's only so much we can do, but just know that your stuff will be reviewed properly with the same that we review an Andreessen deal or anything. So yeah, we encourage everyone to send us if they really believe in it.
Awesome, Vic. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks, advice. Take care, y'all.